I am the terror that flops in the night. I am the subject of this week's diorama build. What will Dave come up with this time? Let's find out.
PREYcollectionStudios is a Patreon service that models cartoon figures. When I saw that they had a Darkwing Duck figure available, I decided I really wanted to make that into a diorama. So I downloaded the file and I printed it off on my resin 3D printer, an Anycubic Photon S. After the print was complete, I cleaned up the file and I got all the pieces ready to start painting. Before I paint any 3D figure that I print off, I put on primer to make sure that the paint sticks properly. In this case, I use Vallejo gray primer and use my airbrush to make sure that everything gets on nice and smooth. These prints come off in multiple parts, so I made sure every part was primered before I went off to paint it. Because I'm a super professional at this YouTube thing, I forgot to actually record the painting of this process, so I'll leave you with this exciting montage. Once I had the figure painted and assembled, I came up with the concept for my diorama, which was to have Darkwing Duck standing on the edge of the heights of a large Gothic building. So I also printed off a gargoyle to act as decoration. Then I started working on the layout for the diorama. I grabbed some XPS foam and I started looking at the logistics and the details of how all of this was going together. Darkwing was going to stand on a railing with his foot on the gargoyles. I needed to figure out the height of the railing. I needed to figure out where the walls would be, how much space I needed to leave for the walls, how high the walls needed to be, all those sorts of things. And once I had all of that planned out, I was then able to plan how I was going to cut up the foam and then assemble the building. Then I went to the Proxxon wire cutter, which is kind of like a table saw, but for foam, and I used it to cut out all of the pieces, and then I assembled them using tacky glue, which I didn't record, so here's another exciting montage. At this stage of the game, I had the basics of the building ready to go, and I was really happy with the progress. The next step was to add some brickwork to give it that final detail touch. To put the brickwork in, I drew it in with a very fine Sharpie, which is really nice for marking up the foam and giving those fine details like brickwork that really makes these dioramas pop. I ended up painting the building with some red for the brick and some gray for the concrete. And then I added some dry brushing and some washes to really bring out the details. I think the brick really came out super well, and the concrete looks a lot like concrete. So I'm really excited for what this building will look like in front of the camera. To actually put Darkwing Duck on the building, I used the little feature of the figure which had a little peg on his foot so he could be put on his own stand. And I put a hole in the foam where that peg would go so Darkwing would stay steady on the building while I took the photos. And once it was ready, I went over to my light box and started taking some photos. I first set my camera up to just expose the image properly, and then I started using my smoke machine and just blasting smoke into the frame just to see what type of images I could get out of it. And then I tweaked the camera settings a few times. One of the things that I noticed was that if the shutter speed was too fast, all the smoke tendrils would be caught in sharp relief, and I didn't want the effect to look like smoke. I wanted it to look more like fine, foggy mist. And the way I accomplished that was to lower the shutter speed down to about 1/40th of a second, which is much slower than normal. And that made all the smoke kind of blur out and even out in the frame and made it look more like mist instead of smoke. I also figured out that, actually, full credit due, my wife figured out that the best way to get that fog effect was to actually blow the smoke up from underneath the model so it would kind of settle in nicely in all the cracks and crevices. Once I had the final shots, it's time to go to Photoshop. Yay! When you're working with smoke, it's very hard to get the exact look you want because the smoke has a mind of its own. But I noticed that I had 3 shots that had parts of the shot of each one had the smoke effect that I wanted for that part. So the first thing I did was merge all the files together into one file that had all the right smoke in all the right places. Then I did some light work and sharpened up Darkwing Duck's face. And then I did some simple color grading and adding some textures and came up with the final image. And I think it turned out really, really well. So that's my Darkwing Duck build. Thank you very much for watching. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.